Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back for another episode. This is Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Thanks for those who are tuned in, those who have subscribed, those who refer others. I really appreciate that. This is another guest day. As people know, from time to time, I will just chat on professional relationships and business networking. And on occasion, usually every other time, once a week for each, I'll have a guest on. People who really have an expertise in the things that we need to learn about. Today is a guest day. I'll get into that in a minute. But, you know, people tell me from time to time, they say, wow, you're smart, Frank. You're really smart. You're the smartest person I know. And I have to kind of chuckle because, well, I don't believe that, first of all. I always tell them I think they need to get out a little more. But I do read a lot and I listen to lots of podcasts and I try and repurpose that information. And I think they automatically think I'm smart because of that. But when I start talking to people like my guest today, I realize I'm not smart. I'm a Neanderthal compared to people who have gotten PhDs and are really kind of dug into a particular craft and understand what's going on in whatever it might be. Last week, if you were on the program last week, I had Mary Chekanese on, and her and I had a chat about gratitude, and I teased a little bit that I would have a guest on this week that would really help us dive into, you know, Mary really talked about, hey, gratitude is good, and we'll touch on that today as well. But the guest today, Melissa Hughes, Dr. Melissa Hughes, she's going to really kind of talk to us about how it all works in the brain. And I think once we kind of understand how it's working and what's happening, it just makes it, for me at least, it makes it easier to try and understand what's going on. So, Melissa Hughes, welcome to the program. Why don't you give us your story? People who are listening, I hope everyone understands that you just don't pull names out of a hat and call somebody up and hit record. I mean, we've talked ahead of time, and she had to kind of get a sense about me, and I had to get a sense about her. So I kind of know her backstory. It's an interesting story. So anyhow, go ahead.
Thanks, Frank. It is. It's great to be here. I have to tell you, I've been looking forward to our conversation here with the listeners because my conversation with you first time was great. So, so my backstory is interesting because I started my career in a fourth grade classroom.
You were a teacher.
I was
right?
a teacher. I was a teacher. I was not the 10-year-old student in the fourth grade classroom. But I was that teacher who was going to change the world one child at a time and, have the mug to prove it. And at the end of my first year, I sat down with my mentor and we did a little bit of a postmortem and talked about what really worked well and what didn't work so well and what do you want to work on over the summer so that you come back a better teacher. And I think the big epiphanous moment for me was, how in the world can I teach kids how to learn if I don't know how the brain works?
Right.
So that kind of started my self-discovery journey into neuroscience. And I unabashedly own it that I am a geek, and I know I love to read the studies and the research and all of that. And I know that most people don't. I think what I found is most people just want to know, how does that apply to me? And how does that make my life better? How does that make my brain work better? So fast forward to where I am today. And that's what I do. I dig through. We are so freaking smart about the brain these days. And so I dig through all that new research and say, oh, you're going to love this because if you do this, then this is what happens in your brain. Just knowing some of those things is it's just cool. It's just a cool thing.
As we talked about before we hit record, having an understanding allows us to be more intentional about it. I mean, we've known for years what gratitude will make us feel good, or giving to other people will make us feel good. We've known that for years, and we've just kind of all chalked it up to that warm and fuzzy feeling, as if it's something mystical and magical. And what we found in the last 20, 30 years is there's actually something going on. And now that we understand what's going on, you can be more intentional about it.
Absolutely.
You can think yourself out of a bad day, right?
Intention is everything, and power is, knowledge is power. So understanding what's happening in that 3-pound squishy gray thing between your ears gives you a sense of how you can intentionally make it work the way you want it to work. For some people that's focus and concentration. For other people that's creativity and innovation. For other people that's communication and collaboration. And so whatever, and sometimes it's all of those things in the course of a week. And the coolest thing is understanding you can create the conditions for your brain to operate a certain way. I love this construct that, more than 90% of the thought processes that happen in our brain are in our subconscious. I mean, it is just ticking. It is just rolling all the time. And we can't possibly be aware of all of the stuff that's going on up there. And there's a system, a neurological, I call it a feature and benefit of the brain.
Okay.
That is called the reticular activation system. And it's like the brain's bouncer. And a really good example is when you're looking for a new car and you decide, I'm going to buy that. I think I want to buy that little red sports car. So you go to the dealership and you drive the little red sports car and you go, you know what? That's a lot of money. I'm going to think about it. So you go home and you sleep on it. In the next 2 days, you see those little red sports cars everywhere. And it's not because there are more on the road. It's because there always have been there, but your brain kind of filters out all this unnecessary, what it thinks is unnecessary noise. But now that you have raised your level of awareness to this little red sports car, now the brain says, oh, well, now that's an important piece of information. I'm going to let that in. And so when you think of the brain's bouncer as deciding what information comes in and what information stays out, you think there's a lot of information that stays out of our awareness. It's still out there. It's still in our orbit. It's just not in our awareness. And so to your point about intention, if you want to be intentional about the things you notice, then you have to actually tell your brain, I'm going to let the good stuff in. Let those good employees in. Let those good interactions come in. You really can tell your brain what is important and what to let in from the unconscious. And I just think when you understand that, when you have that knowledge and you can actually see it in action, like you try it and you go, damn, that worked. Like, that's so cool, right?
Yeah.
And and it's all intention. It's a focus and intention.
Yeah, after we had talked, I stumbled on, or probably before we talked, I stumbled on your article, What Happens Inside a Grateful Brain. And you talk in there about the vicious cycle. We all know about the vicious cycle. And then you talk about the virtuous cycle. And I thought that was, well, it may have been out there, but my reticular activation system hasn't picked up on it before I read it here. But again, it makes so much sense. The vicious cycle I've got, people have a bad day, and it all ends with them in a fender bender that really makes a bad day worse. And I can kind of see, people talk about 3 bad things happening. They're all kind of related. That's my theory on it. I don't know for a fact, but they seem to be all related. But if you want to talk about this virtuous cycle, I think that's really very interesting.
Well, to understand the vicious cycle and the virtuous cycle, you have to understand the fact that the brain actually loves patterns. So the brain looks for patterns. It's because it's efficient and it's easy. It's why jokes are funny to us. It's why jokes kind of shock us a little bit, because it breaks the pattern of what the brain thinks is going to happen. So given that the brain likes patterns, it'll look for something to continue whatever pattern it sees. And so when you're in the vicious cycle, you get up in the morning and you overslept and you spilled coffee on your shirt on the way out to the car, and now it's raining, and oh my God, the traffic is terrible and I can't find a parking spot. Now you're in the vicious cycle, and you're going to find every single thing that is wrong with the world. And believe me, we can find them everywhere.
Sure.
We can find the negatives everywhere we look. And the only way to break that negative feedback loop is to intentionally interrupt it with a positive, be a disruptor with a positive. And so then when you get stuck in this vicious cycle and you say, I'm going to look for all of those things that are good, all of those things for which I have to be grateful. So it's raining today. Wow, I don't have to water my flowers tonight when I get home from work. Sky's doing it for me, right?
Right.
So when you turn things upside down and look at it from a different perspective, and you try to find the gratitude in even the negative things, we can't always do that, but that puts you into this virtuous cycle. And when you're in the virtuous cycle, the coolest thing happens, because your brain is creating all kinds of good neurotransmitters like oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and all that good stuff. And the thing about those good chemicals is they don't just make us feel good. They don't just put us in a good mood. They actually facilitate activity in the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of the brain that does all of the heavy lifting. That's the part of the brain that manages impulse control. So like when the car in front of you just completely cuts you off, when all of those good chemicals are flowing, you are less likely to, burst into flames of road rage. You're much more likely to control your impulses and be calm and rational in situations like that. But the other thing is confirmation cycle, confirmation bias. The brain looks for that which it believes to be true, because not only does the brain like patterns, but the brain likes to be right. And so if you believe you're going to have a crappy day, well, then confirmation bias says the brain is going to look for all the reasons to prove that you are in fact going to have a crappy day. But if you get up in the morning and you believe you're going to have a great day, you're going to make a difference, you're going to contribute to something bigger than yourselves, then the brain is also going to look for evidence to prove that to be true.
So this is why journaling becomes so powerful, is because it's really kind of forcing activity in I shouldn't say activity in the reticular activation system, but you're kind of cueing the reticular activation system with the things to look for.
Bingo. Exactly. Okay. Spot on. Yeah. Okay. And I think if you think about journaling as there's a wealth of research out there about keeping a gratitude journal and what that does to the brain. And I think about, I have a gratitude journal, and I'd love it if everybody went and bought my gratitude journal, but you can use just a regular notebook, and on one side of the spread, you write what you're looking ahead, what you hope to see in your day, what you want to look for, those things you actually trigger your brain to get a jump start in the virtuous cycle. And then on the other side of the page, you write, look back at your day, and you really be introspective about what are the things that you saw in your day. And that is a skill, and it is so valuable because it forces you to pay attention to what you pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we get too far along, what's the name of your journal, the book that you...
So my book is called Happier Hour. So I wrote one book called Happy Hour with Einstein, and then I wrote a second one, which obviously is Happier Hour with Einstein.
Okay.
And the gratitude journal is a companion to the book. So it's just the Happier Hour with Einstein gratitude journal. And they're available on my website or on Amazon. Okay.
All right. Well, good. Well, and we'll get your website in at the end, and I'll certainly put it in the show notes. I didn't see it in here, but I wrote a note as I was reading the article. You talk about these chemicals associated with the virtuous cycle, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, I think you'd mentioned as well. When you get in the vicious cycle, I mean, it's more than not having those good chemicals. Does cortisol come into play with the vicious cycle as well?
Absolutely. So And it has everything to do with why we have survived extinction for millions of years. So the brain is actually tuned to look for the dangers, look for threats. Back in the day, the brain was looking for the saber-toothed tigers and the poison berries. And today we don't have those, but it's that mechanism in the brain that keeps us from walking out into the middle of traffic or stepping off the top of a building or whatever. We also know that now the brain has a really hard time differentiating between physical threats and physical danger and psychological threats and psychological danger. And so the brain actually translates psychological, any kind of threat to your social status. So in the professional sense, if you go into a meeting, you worked really hard on this presentation and you're not 10 minutes into it and somebody knocks your idea and dismisses you completely. And that's not just, the work that you've put into it, but that's a ding to your your social status. And that is a psychological safety issue that actually sounds the alarm bell. And now the brain starts to pump out all of this cortisol. And cortisol goes downstairs to the survival brain. When the brain signals any kind of danger or any kind of threat, then the survival brain kind of takes over and it prepares the body in a million different ways. And it starts delivering these chemicals from not just out of the brain, but also out of glands down by your kidneys. And it prepares us for fight or flight. And it's the sympathetic nervous system is what is engaged, and everything from your breathing to your muscle control to the way your eyes are dilated, everything says, danger, danger, pay attention, something bad is going to happen. When those good chemicals are flowing, they actually flow upstairs to the thinking brain. This is where our impulse control happens, our decision making, our problem solving. And basically what that says is, okay, survival brain, I know you need to be there to kind of keep me from walking out into the middle of traffic, but I got this. So you just hang out, sit back, make sure that, everything is good. But in the meantime, I'm going to be working up here. When the survival brain is in charge, it actually shuts down the activity in the prefrontal cortex so that it can allocate all of those resources to keep us alive. And when I say keep us alive, I mean deal with a threat, whether that is a physical threat or a psychological one. So when you understand that and you realize that, a psychological threat is the same as a physical threat, you say, would you ever walk up to your colleague and just pop them in the face? And we say, no, of course not.
Yeah.
We wouldn't do that. But there are a lot of behaviors that we do that are unintentionally creating the same conditions in the brain as a punch in the face.
We're basically telling ourselves a story is what it sounds like.
Exactly.
Okay. Now you talk in the article, when people think of gratitude, they think about, okay, I need to be happy about where I'm at. But you have a statement here, and I'm going to read it. A genuine expression of gratitude to someone else gives your brain a bigger reward than the person you thank. In other words, we're far better off being grateful to other people for what they have done. I shouldn't say we're better off, but we're better off than they are. They might be happy. My wife might come home, hey, my boss said I did a good job. But the boss is the one who really benefited by doing that. Correct?
Absolutely. So I always say on your worst day, the very best thing you can do for yourself is thank someone else. Because they've done studies where they've asked people to, first they say, write down, think of somebody that you're really grateful for. Now, write down on a piece of paper all of those reasons why you're grateful for that person. And then before they did this exercise, they kind of took a baseline of their personal happiness. And then after they wrote down on this piece of paper all of the reasons why they're grateful for this person, they again measured their personal happiness, and it jumped like 4%. And then what they said was, okay, now you can, if you want to, you can call that person or go see that person and tell that person, read this to that person. And those people that express their gratitude to that other person, now their happiness jumped to 19% greater happiness. But the most significant finding of that study was that the people who had the lowest happiness measurement in the very beginning are the people that got the greatest gains when they express that happiness to someone else. So, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. It ties right into that. It is just completely demonstrative of the virtuous cycle and the vicious cycle, because on your worst day, you're in the vicious cycle. Everything stinks.
Right.
Everything's crappy. And if you just could say, you know what, I'm going to take 1 minute, I'm going to look around, I'm going to find one person, I'm going to catch one person being good, and I'm going to go express my gratitude. It has to be genuine. You can't fake it, because that doesn't count. But if it's genuine, then you get all those good chemicals. And the biggest chemical that actually we feel just to our bones is oxytocin, because we are wired to connect with other people. And when we give or receive gratitude, we actually connect with people on the most human level. When we say to somebody, hey, Frank, thanks so much for helping me with that project. I could have never done that without you. And, we're both this is what's going to happen to both of us because we got that thing done. That very specific, intentional expression of gratitude says, because you did this is how your actions, thoughts, words impacted me. And that's just huge. I mean, that is priceless. You can't put a value on that and how it impacts us.
Well, and the other point you made in the article, which is kind of my third and last point, and then we're going to talk about you and who you're all about, but what you're all about. When we're grateful to somebody, we feel good, they feel good, but it doesn't stop there. You talk about emotional contagion in there. If you could kind of elaborate on that, that would be great for people to hear about. Yeah, I could read it, but you're better.
And there was a research lab in Parma, Italy, and they were working with monkeys. And one of the research students went out at lunchtime. It was a really hot day, and got an ice cream cone. Came back into the lab, and these monkeys were all wired up because they were trying to understand the neural activity between the coordinated movements between the hand and the mouth. So they were wired up, and they were actually connected to these fMRI machines, and they were looking at these brain scans just to see what parts of their brains were activated when they moved their hands, when they moved their mouth, and when they combined the two actions. So a research student comes in, he has an ice cream cone, and he's lifting the ice cream cone to his mouth and putting it down, and lifting it to his mouth and putting it down. And this monkey is watching him eat this ice cream cone. And even though the monkey is not moving his hand to his mouth, his brain is lighting up in the areas as if the monkey was doing the same exact actions. And they're like, wow, this is really cool. So let's see where this goes. And so what they found was it wasn't just actions, but it was also emotions, and it was sounds. So they would play sounds of peanuts cracking on a tape, a audio tape, and the same part of the brain in the monkey lit up as if that monkey were cracking that peanut open. Or they would play noises that demonstrated emotions like laughter or anger or a frightened scream, and the same parts of the brain lit up. The same neurochemicals were released in the monkey's brain as if the monkey were experiencing those emotions himself. So what we know now is that this construct of emotional contagion means if you are in a horrible mood and you've had a terrible morning, and you go into the conference room and you're going to have a brainstorming meeting with your team, and you go in and you have anger or frustration or whatever all over your face. In less than 60 seconds, the people sitting in that room will be generating the same kind of cortisol that you are. And you don't even have to say a thing. Even though you don't tell them that they're in trouble, you don't tell them why you're upset, they are going to catch your emotional state and begin to create the same neurochemicals as you are. So I say to people, you know what? If you're in that kind of mood, you might as well cancel the meeting because you're not going to get a thing out of them.
Yeah.
You know, but I think just understanding that, because nobody would say, you know, if I say, would you intentionally go in and, you know, create cortisol in your team's brains? We know that cortisol doesn't make us a better thinker. So no, you wouldn't intentionally do that, but we do it all the time without knowing. So understanding what's happening between the brain is the first step in understanding how to change the behavior to make us better thinkers and problem solvers and innovators and creators.
Fascinating. Well, let's talk about you. Tell us what you're looking for. People listening, how could they help you?
Well, if you want to learn more about what I do, who I am, I as I mentioned, I wrote Happier Hour with Einstein and the Companion Gratitude Journal, and those are both available on my website and on Amazon. But I'm also a keynote speaker. So I like to describe myself as a neuroscience geek who makes neuroscience really exciting. Because I think when, you know, people think of neuroscience and kind of the jargony studies, that's not who I am. I actually try to bring all of the most recent brain-based research to people who are really interested in understanding how to maximize their cognitive capability and how to create the conditions for more engaged employees, more satisfied employees, and a healthier company culture. And it has everything to do with what's going on in the brain.
Now, one of the best ways to, or I guess a way to get a hold of you would be through your website. And I'm trying to, what would be the web address we would use?
My website is melissahughes.rocks.
All right.
ROCKS. And actually, that brings me great joy to be able to say that. Every time I say that, it makes me smile.
Well, you know what? We don't need to spell it. I will put it in the show notes, but it just speaks to how fun you are, right? You're just a fun person, and I you know, we've talked a couple times, and this has been great. But I am very, very grateful for having you on. And I assume everyone else has enjoyed it too. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I just add one more thing? I deliver a neuro nugget every Friday. It is a 3 to 5 minute video on something that's just absolutely fascinating that will change your life, neurologically speaking. But I deliver that every Friday. There's a link on my website that you can sign up for that. And I respect the inbox. So if you sign up for the Neuro Nugget, you will get the Neuro Nugget and nothing else.
Awesome. So. I will. I'm going to put I'll put the link to your website in there, and people can contact you and sign up for the Neuro Nugget, which I am getting. I am getting it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.